Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we are breaking down the Week 4 main slate for college football DFS. We're going to take a look at this jumbo-sized 13-game Saturday slate for Saturday, September 21st. We're going to break down each game, tell you what we think about it in terms of what it stacks up for DFS, who should be in your lineups, who should be out of your lineups, how should you be attacking all 13 of these games. And I gotta say, this is a slate where the games themselves are not great real-life games. There's not a whole lot of compelling matchups. But from a DFS player's perspective, there's a lot of games here that I really like. There are a lot of offenses where we know what they're trying to do and we know who they're going to try to get the ball to, and a lot of game environments that we think should feature a lot of points, feature a lot of scoring. So should be a pretty high scoring week in DFS this week. And I think there's a ton of options for building your lineup. We're going to break it all down here for you on the show and hopefully provide you guys a little bit of entertainment along the way, because we do have some hot takes and jokes and the like. And, we try to just not make it like just pure, boring, monotone information, right? We try to liven it up a little bit around here. But anyway, if you have not already, make sure you subscribe to the channel that we can be with us for the rest of college football season, including our breakdown of the Friday night slate, which is coming out tomorrow night, and our breakdown of the Saturday night slate, which is going to be coming out Thursday or Friday night, whichever night I have time to record it. But we're going to try to break down most, if not all, of the main slates for college football season until college basketball starts, because then we're going to be kind of dividing our time between the two sports, right? So make sure you're subscribed. We're closing in on 700 subscribers, which is a big milestone for us. Before the start of college football season, we were not yet at 500. So to have grown 200 since the start of college football season is huge. It's amazing. Keep hitting that subscribe button. Keep coming back and joining us every week. I really do appreciate it when you guys do that. And if these videos help you out in any way, please hit the like button on YouTube. If you're listening on audio, please rate and review. Those help out a ton in getting the podcast noticed and getting it to show up in searches. All right, but that's going to do it for the introduction, guys. Let's go ahead and dive in. We got 13 games. Game number 1 on the slate is one of the aforementioned ugly in real life, good in DFS type of games. We got Florida heading to Stark Vegas, as they call it, to take on Mississippi State in cowbell country. Currently, Florida is 6.5-point favorites with a total of 57.5 points. Lines courtesy of FanDuel Sportsbook, which means the projected total is about 32-25 in favor of Florida. We don't round off points in projected totals because you can't actually score 0.25 of a point in a game. So for Florida, let's start at the quarterback position. Last week, they split series between Mertz and Lagway, and it didn't really work. No guy really got in a rhythm. They didn't have a whole lot of offensive success. I think this is a situation that you have to avoid if they're going to continue doing it that way. I would be interested in Lagway if he plays. So there's an interesting stat about DJ Lagway. He actually has 0 turnover-worthy plays so far this season. The advanced analytics, they look at what happens over the course of a play. They determine whether or not a play is turnover-worthy or not. Usually quarterbacks go the other way, where they have more turnover-worthy plays than turnovers. But DJ Lagway has more turnovers than turnover-worthy plays. So he's gotten kind of unlucky. He is truly talented, and I think it's only a matter of time before he breaks out. Mississippi State is not a good football team. They just got walloped by Toledo. So if DJ Lagway were to play the full game, I would have a lot of interest. But until we get an announced plan, I think this is a situation that you got to avoid. I'm recording this here on Tuesday night, and we haven't heard anything about what this situation is going to look like this week. We do know what the skill position players are going to look like for Florida, though. Montreal Johnson Jr. is their leader in the clubhouse in terms of running back. He was not effective at all against Texas A&M, but to me, he is still the workhorse. He is still the guy that you're going to want to roster. Jacoby Jackson did get a little bit of success against Texas A&M, vultured a touchdown in that game. But I'm not super interested. I think this backfield is Montreal Johnson's. And with as bad as Mississippi State is, if you don't want to play the Florida passing attack, you can play Montreal Johnson. This is a team that is projected to score 32 points here this week. At the wide receiver position, it's quite simple. Eugene Wilson is a target monster if he is active. He is very clearly their wide receiver 1 if he is active. We don't know his status yet for this game. Again, recording this Tuesday night, so there's still 4 days. But if he's active, he's a great play, in my opinion. If he's not active, that makes both Badger and Deke great plays. Elijah Badger had 5 targets against Texas A&M, but turned it into 94 yards. Back-to-back games, he's been over 90 yards. He's been pretty productive. And Kamir Deke, the transfer from Wisconsin, was the target leader against Texas A&M with 7. And look, I think these guys are viable to be played independent of their quarterback, right? Whether it's Mertz or Lagway, whether they're splitting snaps. I think because this offense is so condensed and you know where the volume is going to, that if Wilson is active, you can play Wilson. If Wilson is inactive, you can play Badger or Deke and feel pretty confident about it. Now, on the Mississippi State side of things, they have had Not a great start to the season. But in DFS, they still got some playable guys. Blake Shapen is, transfer from Baylor. He's not the best quarterback in the world, but this is an offense with Jeff Lebby as the head coach there now. They're going to throw the ball all over the yard. There's going to be a ton of passing volume. They're projected to trail in this game. They're projected to score 25 points. So if Shapen's able to account for 3 touchdowns, that makes him a viable play. Personally, I think there's better quarterback options on this slate that are cheaper that we're going to get to later, but I don't think he's just a total cross-off this week. The running back position is a total cross-off. So, we mentioned how this is a pass-first offense. Well, Booth, Lee, and Daniels average between 6 and 7 carries per game. This is a full-blown committee of a non-rushing heavy offense. I want no part of it. Moving on to the wide receivers. Kevin Coleman has been their wide receiver 1 so far. He had 9 targets last week against Toledo, and he's kind of been the guy in this passing offense, but I do not want to discount Kelly Akradi. He was hurt at the start of the season, did play pretty much a full-time role against Toledo. I think, everybody projected Akradi to be the number 1 wide receiver in this offense this year. I think eventually he gets there, and at $3,800 against the Florida defense that has gotten torn up by Cam Ward and Marcel Reed of Texas A&M, I don't mind taking a shot at either Kevin Coleman at $5,500 or Kelly Akradi at $3,800. I think they're both very affordable. Mosley and Craver will play a lot of snaps as well as the tight end Seydou Traore. So I think there's a lot of pieces that you can get to from this Mississippi State side, and I'm willing to play these wide receivers, specifically Coleman and Akradi, as one-off plays or as part of a stack. Next up, we have Marshall heading to the Horseshoe to take on Ohio State. This one is going to get ugly fast. Ohio State is 39.5-point favorites with a game total of 51.5 points, meaning the projection is about 45-6 in favor of the Buckeyes. It's hard to have a whole lot of interest in Marshall when they're only implied 6 points. Stone Earl is the starting quarterback. Pass. At running back, it is Turner as the RB1. He's pretty good, but he hasn't played a defense to the level of Ohio State. He splits carries with Houston, who's an NC State transfer, and he wasn't all that effective when he was at NC State. It's hard to imagine either of those two having a lot of success in this game. At the wide receiver spot, maybe you could make an argument for getting to one of the wide receivers. Metcalf is the wide receiver 1. Fitzpatrick has had some pretty big games so far. His biggest game was against Stony Brook, which is FCS competition. Montgomery is a full-time player as well. It's just hard to get excited about a team that's only projected to score 1 touchdown. I think you can full fade Marshall and be okay with it. On the Ohio State side, it's a question of who scores the touchdowns. We've been playing this game with Ohio State where they've pretty much played a max schedule so far this season. They put up over 50 points in each game, but Will Howard, the quarterback, hasn't hit value in DFS in either game. Why? Because he isn't accounting for a lot of touchdowns, right? In the Akron game, it was 3 passing touchdowns only. Western Michigan, it was 1 passing, 1 rushing. If you want to play him, you're placing a bet that he's going to account for 4, maybe even 5 touchdowns. I think he's in play in GPPs because he does have the chance to do that. They are implied 45 points, but if you're playing anybody on Ohio State, it's making a wager that they're going to be the ones that score touchdowns. And the same goes for the running back position. Quinshaw Judkins and Travion Henderson are a full-blown 50-50 committee. Through 2 games, Judkins has 22 carries, Henderson has 18. They're both great real-life players. In DFS, I think they are potential GPP plays because you're just banking on them scoring multiple touchdowns. Is it likely? No, but is it possible? Yes. And for the record, I do think as the season goes on, I do think Judkins is going to be the guy that you're going to want. I also have a little bit of interest in James Peoples and GPPs. If this game gets ugly fast and he gets a lot of carries in the second half, you could absolutely see a touchdown or 2 out of Peoples at only 4,500. I don't know if I'll get to him or not, but I thought it merited mention in all honesty. Then at the wide receiver spot, you've kind of seen a hostile takeover. Jeremiah Smith, the very talented freshman who he looks like Julio Jones on a football field. He's been great so far through 2 games, over 25 fantasy points in both games, explosive pass play of over 40 yards in both games. He has been the guy in this passing offense. And to me, because of his ability to break off explosive plays, I think he's in play, even at $7,500. That is expensive, but he's in play for me. I would rather play Smith than Egbuka. What we know about Egbuka is he is more of a volume-based, lower average depth of target type of player. So if they're not going to be out, this game's going to be a blowout. So these starters are not likely to play the whole game. So if I'm only getting 3/4 of work, maybe even a half of work, I want to play the receiver who can bust off big plays for me, which is Jeremiah Smith, not the wide receiver that needs a lot of volume to hit value like Enigmeka Ibuka. So that's just personally how I see those two receivers. Like I said, Smith is going to be in my player pool, but I don't know how much I'm going to get to him. Next up, we have Houston taking on Cincinnati, which feels like a game in the old Conference USA. I'm young enough to remember when both these teams were Conference USA, but now it's a battle in the Big 12, so go figure. Currently, Cincinnati is 3.5-point favorites with a game total of 48.5 points, meaning the projection is 26-23 in favor of Cincinnati. Now, on the Houston side, Donovan Smith is a guy that we've seen him as the starter for this Houston team for 2+ years now. He has a lot of upside. He can put up touchdowns in bunches really quickly, but he has some dud games and he has some big games. Like, you just don't really know what you're going to get out of him. To me, at only $6,300 on DraftKings, he's in play. And this is a game that could end up being pretty high scoring. And $6,300, you talk about, we always want 3 times the value of the salary from from a player in terms of fantasy points. He only needs 19 points to hit value, whereas some of these other quarterbacks up in the 8K range need 24, 25. It's just a more attainable goal, and I think he's much more likely to do that than some of the quarterbacks in the 8K range, so he is going to make my player pool this Saturday. At the running back spot, Sanford has kind of been the lead running back recently. Against Rice, he was definitely the lead dog, had 15 carries, only turned it into 71 yards, wasn't involved in the passing game, did not score a touchdown. But $4,200 for a team starting running back that's very clearly their starting running back, I think there's worse plays out there. And then at the wide receiver spot, you know who it's going to be for Houston. Manjack is, in my opinion, their best receiver. He is not supremely fast, but he just gets open. Like you watch these Houston games, and it's like, oh, look, there's Manjack. He's wide open again. And $4,800, I think he's a great stacking partner with Donovan Smith. Probably would not play him otherwise. I feel the same way about Stephon Johnson. He's the second best receiver in this offense. Good stacking partner with Smith, probably not getting to him as a one-off. And then Mekhi Muse is the other receiver who's actually caught the most passes for this team so far this season. It just has not turned into really any explosive plays or any touchdowns. But $3,900, I think all 3 of those guys make for great stacking partners with Donovan Smith, but I'm probably not going to be into them as one-off plays. Like, if you think about how one of those wide receivers were to go off, it would probably be because of 2-3 touchdowns, right? Which means Donovan Smith were to throw 2-3 touchdowns. And so I really am not super interested in the upside of those receivers independently. I really just want them as a stacking partner with Smith. On the Cincinnati side, Brendan Sorsby has been a guy that we've played a lot. I've liked playing him this year. He's been pretty good so far this year. And to me, he's very cost effective. He's only $7,300. Much like with Donovan Smith, that lessens the goal that you need for him to hit value in a game where his team's projected to score 26 points. He's going to get to throw the ball 30+ times. He has in every game so far this season. I just think it's a pretty good spot for Sorsby, and he's definitely going to make my player pool. At the running back spot, you have Corey Kiner at $5,200, which to me, at first glance, I was not interested. Then I looked deeper in the numbers, and he's got 20+ carries in back-to-back games, 20+ fantasy points in back-to-back games. If they're running the football, it's going to be Kiner. This is primarily a pass-first offense, but if they are running, it's going to be with Corey Kiner. And there's not a whole lot of great cheap running backs on this slate. I think Corey Kiner at $5,200 does give you an option that's a little bit of a salary saver who is certainly in play. Then at the wide receiver spot, this is the best part of Cincinnati. You know who they're throwing the ball to. It's Xavier Henderson. He had 13 targets against Miami, Ohio. He is very clearly the wide receiver one in this offense. 2 games of 20+ fantasy points so far this season. And if this game were to shoot out, it would be because of Xavier Henderson. Like, I just really think that whether you're including a game stack, a Cincinnati stack, whatever, or maybe even a one-off play, not including a stack, Xavier Henderson kind of fits what you want for all of that. He's got guaranteed volume in a good game environment, and you don't necessarily have to stack him with or without his quarterback. I like Xavier Henderson a lot in DFS this week. He's one of my favorite high-priced wide receiver options. The other guy from this Cincinnati team that I'm considering is Joe Royer. He is the tight end. He's really been the second best receiving option in this offense. He's had double-digit fantasy points in 3 straight games. He's certainly a salary saver. And I think if you're looking to make a little Cincinnati stack, you can go Sorsby, Henderson, and then Royer. And that's 3 people that's not super expensive. It allows you to get to a lot of other plays and a lot of other game environments. But I do think that this game environment does not need to be ignored with a total of 48.5. Game number 4, we've got the Jayhawks heading to Morgantown to take on West Virginia. West Virginia is currently 2.5-point favorites over Kansas with a total of 57.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 30-27 in favor of West Virginia. Let's talk about Kansas. So Jalen Daniels has been one of the biggest disappointments so far of the college fantasy football season, if I'm being honest. So Kansas, they went out this offseason and they upgraded their offensive line in the transfer portal. They returned a lot of their talent offensively, and Daniels was coming back from injury. All signs were pointing up for this offense, right? They did lose their offensive coordinator to Penn State, and it seems like he kind of took Daniels' explosiveness with him. I don't necessarily know if this offensive coordinator that's there now is making the best use of Daniels. They kind of seem to abandon the run sometimes, but really it just hasn't translated to Daniels having the same success that he had last year and the year before, even though the systems that are in place, the other players around him are still playing well. He's got a great system, great other rest of his offense around him, just hasn't turned into greatness for Daniels. So if there were a place for him to turn it around, he's played 3 games. He hasn't passed for over 160 yards in a game, hasn't ran for over 70 yards in a game. If there were a game for him to turn it around, it would be against West Virginia, who gave up a ton of points to Pitt last week, who gave up a ton of points to Penn State in week 1. This is not a good defensive West Virginia team. I think this was a good bounce back spot for Daniels. I wish he was a little bit cheaper on DraftKings personally, but $8,000 is not a lot to pay for a guy who we know is a dual threat, and we know he's capable. We know he's got a good matchup. He just has to go out and do it. Now, at the running back spot, look, if you don't want to target Jalen Daniels, target Devin Neal. This is one of the most efficient running backs in the country. He is averaging 7 yards per carry on the season, and he had 23 carries last game against UNLV. Why does that matter? That was a close game where Kansas was kind of in the lead most of the way. That shows you that when they're in the lead, when they're playing in one of these games, it's going to go back and forth. They are determined to still run the football with Neal, who, like I said, is an efficient runner. So at $7,400, I think he's one of the best running back plays on the slate. And if I'm not going to be getting to Daniels, I definitely want to be getting to Neal. I think that it's quite likely that one of those guys has a big-time performance on Saturday. Now, at the wide receiver spot, much like what I've said about a few other teams, I'm probably only interested in these receivers as stacking partners, whether it's with Daniels or whether it's as a part of a game stack. Grimm has been the best receiver in this room through 3 games. He was banged up a lot of last year. Now he seems to be fully back. We have talked about how last year these guys alternated big games, right? You never knew who it was going to be. Well, so far earlier in the season, Grimm has looked like the one who is most likely to deliver that big game. But don't count out Lawrence Arnold, who last week did have double-digit fantasy points against West Virginia, and he was the most productive receiver in that room last week. So 8 targets in that game, right? So I really do think that this is a pretty good spot for Arnold as well. Those 2 are the clear top 2 in the pecking order, then followed by Skinner, in my opinion. But like I said, I'm probably only getting to this receiver room as a part of a game stack or team stack of the Jayhawks. Now, on the West Virginia side, Garrett Green is their quarterback, and we played him a lot last week. I was hyping him up last week. Everybody seemingly played him last week because why? He's at a very affordable price tag. He had a pretty good matchup last week, and he has a ton of upside. And last week, he really got unlucky in terms of touchdowns. If I'm not mistaken, they had 1 call back for penalty. They had another that was overturned by replay. Like, he could have had a bigger game than he did. And really with Garrett Green, another thing you got to remember is he's a big-time dual threat. He's going to get you a ton of points with his legs. I love the upside of this, taking on a Kansas team that just gave up 20-plus fantasy points to Matthew Sluka, another quarterback who does a lot of damage with his legs. So I think this is another great spot for Garrett Green. Remember, this is a guy who had 3 40-plus fantasy point games last year. So we know the upside is literally through the roof. We know this game environment's pretty good. Going to be rolling the dice with Garrett Green again this week. At the running back spot, look, they kind of to kind of quote Dennis Green, the legendary coach of the Arizona Cardinals, they are who we thought they were. Jaheim White is an explosive player, doesn't generally see a ton of workload, but he can break off a long run at any time, whereas C.J. Donaldson is kind of the plotter. He is going to get more volume. He has games where he scores more fantasy points just because of volume and just because he's the one that scores the touchdown, but Jaheim White can break off a long run at any time. Both of them they're kind of going to be in play for me. I don't know how much I'm going to get to both of them, but they're probably both going to make my player pool this week. At the wide receiver spot, because of his dual threat ability, I do think you can play Garrett Green unstacked. What's interesting, though, in terms of this receiver room is it's super inconsistent. There's just not a whole lot of passing volume to go around. Justin Robinson has a touchdown in back-to-back weeks. He doesn't have a whole lot of volume to go with it, but if you think the trend continues, he's only 3,300. Hudson Clement is probably the most likely to give an explosive game in this receiver room. He was the non-beneficiary of some of the replay reviews and flags last week against Pitt. If there's going to be one that's going to break the slate, it would probably be Hudson Clement. And then don't forget about the other starter, Jaden Bray, Oklahoma State transfer, and then the tight end, Cole Taylor, who's actually seen the most consistent volume on this team. Like I said, I don't think you have to stack Garrett Green because he doesn't have a ton of passing volume and he spreads the ball around. But if you were, my preference would be Clement and then Taylor and then Bray. That's just how I see it here for the West Virginia Mountaineers. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then we are going to continue on with the. Now, I do want to mention there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm recording the show on a Tuesday night, so if there's any updates or anything like that happen before game time, I try to be good about tweeting it out. I'm also more than happy to answer any lineup questions, like, as news arises. If you want to know my opinion, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord, where I do a lot of that as well in there. Fantasy Corner Discord is a lot of really smart, really good people. Play DFS for a lot of different sports. And we're just in there talking lineups, talking strategy, chatting it up, sweating it out. And it's just a great time. If you're looking for people to talk DFS with, I cannot recommend enough. And we got all sports covered in there. And then lastly, if you want to know who actually makes my DFS lineups every week, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. What we do on Patreon is we post our core for every college football DFS slate, and we go through why in terms of a X's and O's perspective, a game theory perspective, why we're playing, who we're playing. I'm not just going to sit here and guarantee that you can play them and make thousands of dollars. It's not that easy, but you can get information from somebody who's done a ton of research and knows these teams, knows these players, and help build your own process and get better at college football DFS. And also, I do write the weekly article at drroto.com where I profile just the best plays of the slate. drroto.com, they got all sports covered over there. Check them out if you have not already, because I will have the weekly article up there for their all-access subscribers as well. All right, let's go ahead and continue. So we have got next up NC State heading to Clemson. And this one is interesting. The spread on this game right now is not what it was at the start of the season. Clemson is 19.5-point favorites with a total of 47.5, which means the projected total is about 33-14 in favor of the Tigers. NC State won last year's meeting between these two teams 24-17, and that was with MJ Morris starting at quarterback, not Brendan Armstrong. MJ Morris, now at Maryland and not starting. That tells you anything about his success at NC State. Anyway, at the quarterback position for State, Grayson McCall is doubtful. It is very likely to be freshman CJ Bailey. And I got to say, I watched a lot of this Louisiana Tech game, and it was peaks and valleys from CJ Bailey. He would make some wow throws, and then he'd miss some layups. I don't really know what to expect from him. I do know he's a little bit of a dual threat. $5,700 is not a bad price for a starting quarterback who can run a little bit, but he is going up against the Clemson defense, which definitely makes things tougher. At the running back spot, we thought it was going to be Jordan Waters, like all by his lonesome at the start of the season, but right now it's a committee with Raphael and Smothers all playing. They definitely went more run heavy when they got to CJ Bailey at quarterback last week, but the problem is that while they got more run heavy, they were splitting it among three guys. None of them are going to be in my player pool this week. The wide receiver spot, you do have one of the top receiver plays on the slate in Kevin Concepcion. And look, what's a quarterback's best friend? Getting the ball to a really good receiver. And you can get the ball to Concepcion in a variety of ways. They get it to him on screens. They get it to him on jet sweeps. They get it to him on RPOs. They get him the ball any way possible just to get it in his hands. It's why he tends to catch so many passes. It's why he scores so many touchdowns. And look, even if you don't have a whole lot of faith in this NC State offense this week, Concepcion can still have a big game on his own. Last year, in a game that didn't feature a ton of points, he did have over 100 total yards and 2 touchdowns in that game against Clemson, so clearly they had trouble covering him last year. I don't think he's the worst play in the world, and I do think he's going to come in at low ownership because I don't think a lot of people are going to click that price tag for a guy playing with a backup quarterback against a pretty good defense. The other guys that play in this passing offense are Collins, Rogers, Grimes, and Jolie. They're all on the field pretty much as full-time players. Grimes and Collins and Rogers have a little bit of a rotation, but to me, they're all playable. They're TD or bust plays. Like if you play them, you're going to need a touchdown because so much of the volume goes to Concepcion that really they're not going to have like these 9-catch, 10-catch games. You're going to need a touchdown from one of them in order for it to hit value. But you know who's going to be out there with NC State. That's the good news. On the Clemson side, Cade Klubnik had the bounce-back game of all bounce-back games. After scoring 2 fantasy points against Georgia, he put up 50 against App State. That was quite the revenge performance for Clemson after everybody saying they sucked after how they just got battered by Georgia. And really, Klubnik is not – I don't know, man. I don't know what to make of this guy. Every time I feel like I have a read on him, he – does something that I don't expect, like the App State game. Last year against NC State, he had 263 yards and no touchdowns. Look, I got to be honest, $8,200 is a lot to pay for Cade Klubnik, in my opinion. I would rather pay down to guys like Green, guys like Sorsby, even guys like Jalen Daniels, guys that are dual threats and are in better game environments. I think $8,200 is a little bit rich for Cade Klubnik, in my opinion. The running back spot, I do love Phil Maffa, and he is underpriced at $6,000. He is seeing total workhorse usage. Against App, he really only had a half of work because they were just so dominant, but he only needed a half of work to put up 20 fantasy points. Only $6,000. Love the play. I think that NC State's defense is pretty good, but Maffa's usage is just going to be so great. He's going to be able to overcome that. Last year against them, Will Shipley played that game as well, so Maffa was splitting time, and he still had 80-plus yards and 2 touchdowns in this game against NC State last year. So I do think that Maffa clearly has some sort of advantage on this team. I think he's in a great spot on DraftKings this week. The wide receiver spot, Antonio Williams is probably their best receiver. He's priced at $5,000. Look, if you want to stack with Klubnik, go for it. I'm probably not playing any of these guys as one-offs, though. Brenningstool is a tight end who saw a ton of volume against App State, 7 targets in that game. And then Brian Wesco is the 5-star receiver who is supremely talented. If there's anybody that's going to catch a deep ball for this team, it's going to be Brian Wesco. This team had really lacked like a vertical weapon the last few years in terms of a guy who can really take the top off of defense. Wesco is that guy. If I were to play anybody, it'd probably be Wesco because he really can pay off his salary in one play. Next up, we've got Arkansas heading to Jordan-Hare to take on the Auburn Tigers. This one is another one of those ugly in real life, great in DFS type of games. Auburn is 3.5-point favorites with a total of 58.5, meaning the projection is about 31-28 in favor of the Tigers. Arkansas has the most concentrated offense on the slate, one of the most concentrated offenses in all of college football. Their quarterback is Taylor Green, who has been very inconsistent as a passer. Just look at the box score if you don't believe me on that one. But he's had a ton of rushing upside. And so he hasn't scored under 27 fantasy points ever in any game this season. Now, it's only 3 games, but still, 27 fantasy points 3 weeks in a row. It's pretty impressive. He's going to run the football. This is an offense that is built off of his legs. Love to play at 7,500. And then, oh, by the way, his running back, Jaquindon Jackson, has ran for over 100 yards in every single game, over 25 fantasy points in every single game. I think he's a great play also. You know who's going to be in the backfield. You know who's going to be getting the touches for this team. And then at the wide receiver spot, they have a number 1 wide receiver, Andrew Armstrong, who is clearly their number 1 wide receiver. Double-digit targets in both games he's played. Get this, they only completed 11 passes against UAB. 8 of them went to Andrew Armstrong. He is very clearly this team's top receiver. So if you're stacking up Taylor Green, which, by the way, I think because of Taylor Green's legs, I think you could play him unstacked. I think you could stack him with Jaquindon Jackson if you wanted. But if you're going to stack him with a receiver, it's very clearly Andrew Armstrong is the one that you want. Now, let's say that, Auburn comes up with this game plan to take Armstrong away. Brodin and have been the 2 best receiving options for them so far this season, but they did not have any catches against their most recent game against UAB. Luke Has is a tight end. Loved him in the game against Oklahoma State, and he paid off a little bit for me there on that one. All right, now on the Auburn side, they went totally out of left field last week, and they started Hank Brown at quarterback. If I'm being honest, I would not have even guessed that he would have been the backup quarterback that they would have picked. Like, I thought they would have gone to the freshman Walker White if they were going to bench Peyton Thorne. But he looked really good, but it was against New Mexico. So I have no idea if this guy's any good or not, right? Because Peyton Thorne sure looked good in week 1 against Alabama A&M or whoever they played, right? And then, next thing you know, he's getting benched. So anyway, Hank Brown, he's their starter. Look, if he was at $5,000, $5,700, I think he was a great play. $7,000 for an unknown entity, I think, is a lot to pay, though, when there's a lot of good quarterback options on this slate that are not a whole lot more expensive than he is. At the running back spot, Jarquez Hunter is their guy. And look, what's a backup quarterback's best friend? running the football. And Jarquez Hunter can do that. He had 20 carries in that game against New Mexico, 152 yards, 32 fantasy points. Now, granted, Arkansas is a pretty good run defense. Ollie Gordon only had 49 yards against them in week 2, and Ollie Gordon is one of the best backs in college football. But Jarquez Hunter, $6,300 for a guy who's going to have a ton of volume. I'd rather play Phil Maffa for $300 cheaper, but I think he's a pretty solid play for where he's priced at and the situation he's in. The wide receiver spot, Keandre Lambert-Smith is their big play guy, and he should have a bigger target share if Cam Coleman cannot go in this game. He's the primary guy I would have interest in. You've also got Rivaldo Fairweather, the tight end, who has a pretty sizable role with the offense as well. But those are really the only two that I would consider. Cam Coleman's status definitely impacts that. If Cam Coleman's active, I think it creates a little bit of a mess for this receiving room. Next up, we have UCLA traveling to the Bayou to take on LSU. LSU is 24.5-point favorites with a total of 56.5 points. The projection is about 40-16 in favor of the Bayou Bengals themselves. Let's talk about UCLA. Ethan Garbers is just a super unsexy quarterback pick. Not a whole lot of passing volume, not a whole lot of throwing down the field, not a whole lot of rushing volume. $6,800, there's better plays out there, my friend. Now, if you're looking to be devil's advocate and make an argument for Ethan Garbers, it would be that the LSU defense is hot garbage. They just allowed Lenore Sellers to run all over them and then allowed Robbie Ashford to look pretty good against them as well. But I just think there's better quarterbacks out there. I'm good. The running back spot, they do have a guy I like, which is TJ Harden. He is a workhorse running back, and he has usage in the passing game. And that's really what we want in DFS, right? And LSU is a defense that they gave up 68 rushing yards to Woody Marks in week 1, 143 rushing yards to Rocket Sanders last week. This LSU defense is not good. If anybody's going to take advantage of it, it would be TJ Harden. Objectively, I would rather just play Phil Maffa at $6,000. So I think the last two guys we talked about, Hunter and Harden, they're going to see a little bit of an ownership squeeze because people just opt to pay down to Maffa. But I do think that it is a pretty good situation for him. He's certainly going to make my player pool. The wide receiver spot for UCLA, this is just an unsexy passing offense because they pass the running back a lot. We do know the three guys that are going to be out there. It's going to be Flores, Sturdivant, and Loya. But with the passing game just not being very good and with them not having a whole lot of explosive plays in the passing game, my interest in them is quite minimal. On the LSU side, they got Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback, and he's been pretty good to start the season. I don't want to crown him or anything, but 40 fantasy points against Nichols, 22 against USC, 14 against South Carolina. The South Carolina game was not great. He really needed to get his 300-yard bonus. Here's the problem with Garrett Nussmeier. He has to get multiple touchdowns to pay off his price tag because he has no rushing upside. In this game, could he get multiple passing touchdowns? Yes, they're projected to score 40 points. So really, if you want to play Nussmeier, which I think is a better price-adjusted play this week than he was last week. If you want to play Nussmeier, play him stacked with one or two of his wide receivers and hope and pray that he throws for 4 or more touchdowns. The running back spot is interesting for LSU because A, it is committee central. B, there might be a leader in the committee, and that is Caden Durham. $4,100 on DraftKings, was by far their best runner last week. I mean, he just kind of popped off the screen when he got in. 11 carries, 98 yards, 2 touchdowns in that game. Clearly their best runner in that game. Whether that sticks, I don't know. This team has historically used a committee at running back, so I don't know what's going to happen. But he looked great last week, and if he's able to do that again, $4,100 is a really cheap price tag. I think he's probably one of the best cheap running back options on this slate. The wide receiver spot is just kind of a mess for LSU, right? Kyron Lacey has been a target hog, but let me think the nice way to say this. He's not Malik Neighbors. He's not Brian Thomas Jr. He's not this supremely talented player that it's you got to get the ball to him. He's always open. I don't see it that way. So he's had a great start this season, but $8,100 is a little expensive. I'd rather pay down for other guys. To me, he's a stack with Nussmeier, but the problem is it makes for a very expensive stack when you do that. The other problem with this passing game is Chris Hilton Jr. might be back, and I would venture to guess, knowing what I know, he's going to come back and start, which is going to impact Daniels. It's going to impact Taylor, or it's probably not going to impact Taylor, more on him in a second, but it'll impact Aaron Anderson, who's been the second best wide receiver in this offense so far, 5 catches in each of the first 3 games. So really, we got to get an update on Hilton. Otherwise, the only really way I'm going to play these LSU wide receivers is if it's a stack with Garrett Nussmeier. And like I said, I'm probably playing 2 of them and hoping and praying that they're the ones that catch the touchdowns. Don't sleep on Mason Taylor. He's only $4,700. He is their tight end. He's seen very consistent usage in this passing game so far this season. Next up, we've got Arizona State taking on Texas Tech, and there should be some points scored in this one. Texas Tech is 3.5-point favorites. The total is 59.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 31-28 in favor of the Red Raiders. This is the highest game total on the slate. Now, on the Arizona State side, they played Texas State last week, which, by the way, if you're Arizona State, why is your AD scheduling a game at Texas State on a Thursday night in September? I don't get it. You're a Power 4 team. They're the Group of 5 team. They're supposed to be coming to you, big dog. I don't know what the AD was doing. Anyway, they got out of it with a win, barely. And St. Levitt is a dual threat quarterback who averages 9 fantasy points per game from his legs, from his rushing. That's pretty good, right? And in this game against Texas Tech, we've seen the Texas Tech defense give up 50-plus to Abilene Christian, but then they came back last week and really just walloped North Texas. I don't really know what to make of the Texas Tech defense, but we know the game environment is probably going to be pretty good. Sam Levitt, a dual threat, certainly in play for me. I think there's better point per dollar plays out there, but he's going to make my player pool for sure. The running back spot, Cam Scatabo is an absolute workhorse running back at 7,300. He actually leads all Power 4 running backs in carries so far this season. And to me, that warrants playing him, right? Like you every time you have a guy that you know is going to get 20-plus touches at the running back spot, that pretty much puts him in your player pool, in my opinion. And the matchup against Texas Tech looks pretty good. So definitely going to be a guy that I'm going to be playing. The wide receiver spot, because Levitt runs so much, because Scatabo runs so much, there's not really a whole lot of volume to go around for the wide receivers, but Jordan Tyson has been their best guy, and he had a big-time breakout game against Texas State. 6 receptions, 8 targets, 120 yards, and a touchdown, 27 fantasy points. If you're playing anybody in the Arizona State passing game, it should be Jordan Tyson. Did I say Jaywin Tyson? I meant Jordan Tyson. Jaywin Tyson is a basketball player that went from Texas Tech to Cal, which is a natural segue right into Texas Tech, right? So for Texas Tech, Baron Morton is their starting quarterback. And look, he's kind of just been good every time he's been healthy. Just the rap on him has been that he can never finish a season. And he's had quite the up and down so far this season, but he's been over 30 fantasy points in 2 or 3 games. I don't mind it at $8,400. He doesn't give you a whole lot of rushing upside, so I do think you would probably want to play him stacked. But $8,400 for a guy that's in the best game environment on the slate, don't have a problem with it. At the running back spot, Taz Brooks is an absolute workhorse. He was a workhorse for them last year. He's been that this year, 27 and 17 carries in the first 2 games that he has played. And, oh, by the way, his backup Valdez is out. So there's just more incentive for this team to give the ball to Taj Brooks. And really, if you're looking to get access to this game environment, but you don't want to play the quarterbacks, play one of the running backs, because I'd be pretty confident that either Scatabo or Brooks is going to give you a very viable performance in DFS this week. At your spot, there's a very clear top 2 options. It's Kelly and it's Eakin. So Eakin is actually a high school teammate of Baron Morton. He's kind of like, what's the best metaphor here? He's kind of like the Edelman to Baron Morton's Tom Brady, right? Like he's kind of the guy that he just looks for, in clutch situations when he needs to find a guy. He's going to look Coy Eakin's way because he can trust him, right? So $5,700 for the quarterback safety blanket in the best game environment at Slate's not a bad option. Josh Kelly is more the explosive play type. He was the target leader in weeks 1 and 2. I like Josh Kelly as well. If I'm playing Baron Morton, I'm definitely playing one of Kelly or Eakin with him. And don't sleep on Jaywin Conyers, the tight end. 19 fantasy points in week 1, 13 fantasy points in week 3. He's got some pretty solid usage in this passing game as well. But like I said, if I'm playing these receivers, I'm playing them stacked with Baron Morton. Next up, we have Miami, Ohio, traveling to South Bend to take on Notre Dame. And this one has Notre Dame as 27.5-point favorites with a game total of 43.5 points, meaning the game or the projected score is about 35-8 in favor of the Irish. And this is their second game against MAC competition this year, hoping that it goes different than the first time for Notre Dame's sake. And also my dad, noted Notre Dame fan. So I really hope that they're not taking this one lightly and they definitely go out and take care of business this game. Miami, Ohio, it's hard to advocate for playing anybody against the Notre Dame defense right now. Notre Dame's defense has only surrendered 1 DFS viable player, 1 player that hit 3 times value for their salary all season long, and that was Ontario Brown of Northern Illinois, their running back, and it's because he broke off a long touchdown run. I don't really want to play any of these guys going up against Notre Dame. If you want to, knock yourself out. Their quarterback is Brett Gabbert. This is a very pass-heavy team. You're going to get a ton of passing volume, but is that volume actually going to turn into points? I don't know. At the running back spot, it is absolutely committee central with low rushing volume. Davis, Downing, Mazzee are all going to see carries, hard pass. The wide receiver, you do know one thing. Cade McDonald is their guy. He's scored 21 and 30 fantasy points in both games so far this season, 8 catches in both those games. He's their clear number one. Problem is he's going to be guarded by Benjamin Morrison all game. So, even if you do think he's a quality player and you do think he has projectable volume, the matchup's bad. And I think there's better points per dollar wide receiver plays out there. On the Notre Dame side, Riley Leonard has gone through a lot of criticism so far early in the season because if you look at his game log, you will notice no touchdown passes. However, if he is going to run like he ran against Purdue, he does not need to throw touchdown passes to be DFS viable. Against Purdue, he ran for 100 yards and had 3 rushing touchdowns en route to 35 fantasy points. And oh, by the way, that was all in the first half. He can do that. And so Riley Leonard is probably going to be in my player pool because he has that rushing upside. Who cares if he doesn't throw a passing touchdown? However, devil's advocate, I do think that this would be a good week for Notre Dame to go out and be like, hey, we need to get everybody off Riley Leonard's back. We need to have him throw a touchdown. So I do think he's going to account for multiple touchdowns here in this game. $7,700, pretty reasonable salary. More about his stacking options in a second, though. Jeremiah Love, $5,500, one of my favorite points per dollar running backs on the slate. He scored a touchdown in every game so far this season. He has hit 16 fantasy points in every game so far this season. He's broke off a long, explosive run in every game so far this season. What more do you want? He's one of the top running back plays on the slate, going up against a defense where Notre Dame should very clearly have an advantage on the offensive line. I know Notre Dame keeps losing offensive linemen to injury, but even though that keeps happening, they should still have the advantage on the line in this game against Miami, Ohio. The wide receiver spot, it's a mess for the Irish right now. You got a lot of guys playing snaps, not a whole lot of consistent passing volume. I'm just not interested. If you were to make an argument for anybody, maybe Chris Mitchell gets a deep touchdown. Maybe Mitchell Evans turns back to 2023 Mitchell Evans. If I'm playing Riley Leonard, I'm probably playing him unstacked and banking on him getting that 100 rushing yards again. All right, next game up, we have got Georgia Tech taking on Louisville, or Louisville, as the locals will call it. I need to say it the way the locals say it. Louisville is 10.5-point favorites with a total of 57.5 points, meaning the projected game total is Louisville 34-24. For Georgia Tech, I love Haynes King. I play Haynes King a lot in DFS. I do. It's just something that I've done ever since he started at Georgia Tech. He is mobile. He is aggressive. He is what you want in a quarterback on your DFS lineups. And this is one of the best game environments of the slate. He's only $7,600. He very easily could give you the 23, 24 points he needs to hit 3 times value. Love Haynes King this week at $7,600. Also, worth noting, if you're playing a quarterback that is not purely a runner, so not talking about your Riley Leonards, not talking about your Jalen Daniels, not talking about your Garrett Greens, not talking about your Jalen Milroe for Alabama, right? If you're playing a quarterback who's not primarily a runner, it is worthwhile for them to have very clear stacking partners. Haynes King has very clear stacking partners. There are 2 receivers who eat up all the volume in this offense. It's Malik Rutherford and it's Eric Singleton Jr. Rutherford had all the fanfare through 2 weeks of the season. He was great against FSU. And Syracuse had the most passing volume, was the guy that they were targeting, and was, again, pretty good against VMI, putting up 15 fantasy points. However, the pendulum swung back the other way. Last year, Eric Singleton Jr. was their best receiver. He was their highest volume receiver. He wasn't that in weeks 1 and 2, and now the pendulum has swung back, and Eric Singleton was the volume guy in week 3 against VMI. So it begs the question, right? Well, is Singleton the guy you want, or is Rutherford the guy you want? Are you going to base your production off of the first 2 weeks or the second 2 weeks, or preseason expectations, right? Singleton, I think, makes more sense than Rutherford, but to me, that makes Rutherford more of a contrarian play and hoping that, maybe if people are stacking up Haynes King, you're different by playing Rutherford. But those 2 guys are going to be the primary guys in this passing offense for Georgia Tech. Now, we skipped over the running back for Georgia Tech. It is Jamal Haynes. He is a workhorse. He is the guy that is seeing a ton of carries. Not a whole lot of success against VMI, but that's against FCS competition. He didn't play the full game. I'm willing to write that one off. Because he is such a workhorse, he's going to make my player pool at 6,200. With this game environment being one of the best of the slate at 57.5 points, I don't mind getting to Jamal Haynes if you're not getting to Haynes King. Now, on the Louisville side, you've got Tyler Shuck at quarterback, who is Baron Morton North, which ironically they were teammates. But basically, he's been a good quarterback as long as he's been healthy ever since he's been playing in college football. And I really think that he's worth a look in this game when, Louisville has a 34-point team total. He's had over 24 fantasy points in both games. Definitely worth a look. Also, like Haynes King, very clear stacking partner. For the running back spot for Louisville, it's interesting because I can't find like a super reliable depth chart. Don Chaney was supposed to be the starter heading into the season. He got hurt in their most recent game. If he plays, I like him. Obviously, don't play him if he doesn't play. But Maurice Turner is the guy who has been listed as the starter recently, and he's been probably the more effective runner recently. $4,200 I don't think is a bad price tag to pay because the Georgia Tech defense can be had by the run. At the wide receiver spot, I think you've got an easy chalk option for Louisville. It's Ja'Cory Brooks. He's sitting at $4,800. So historically, the Jeff Brom offense features one wide receiver big time. When it was Purdue, it was Rondale Moore. It was Charlie Jones. There's another guy that I can't think of off the top of my head right now. And then last year for Louisville, it was Jamari Thrash, right? Well, all the mystery coming into the season was, hey, who's going to be the Jeff Brom wide receiver one this year? It looks like it's going to be Ja'Cory Brooks. He's been great through 2 games. He's only $4,800. He's one of the top plays on the slate. Expect a ton of ownership for Ja'Cory Brooks, but I will be one of those people who does have ownership on him. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then let's finish this. All right, we got 3 games to go. We're in the home stretch here. If this video has helped you out in any way, please hit the like button. Please rate and review if you're listening on audio. I promise those do not fall on deaf ears. They help me out a ton in terms of getting the videos and getting the podcast noticed. And if I'm helping you in any way, please show some support to me by doing that. I really do appreciate it, guys. All right, now let's go ahead and dive into Rutgers taking on Virginia Tech. This is one of the lower game totals of the slate. Virginia Tech is 3.5-point favorites with a total of 46.5, meaning the projection is about 25 to 22 in favor of the Hokies. For Rutgers, I have zero interest in this Rutgers passing game. Their quarterback is Ethan Kaliak-Manis, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because he was at Minnesota last year, and he was not very good at Minnesota last year. He's been good in his first 2 games at Rutgers, but it's been against awful competition. Just a hard pass for me at $6,400. The guy I am interested in is Kyle Monangai, who has been one of the best running backs in college fantasy football so far early in the season. He's a price tag at $7,600, which I actually think is quite reasonable. He's put up 26 and 41 fantasy points through 2 games. His backup is hurt, meaning he just has all the volume to himself. And Virginia Tech gave up 243 rushing yards to Old Dominion last week. They gave up 180 rushing yards to Vanderbilt week 1. I think I can make an argument that Kyle Monangai is one of, if not the top running back plays on the slate. At the wide receiver position for Rutgers, the good news is they kind of do give volume to one guy. It's Demir Miller. I'm really not interested in anybody else, though, if I'm being honest, but I'm probably just going to avoid this Rutgers passing game altogether. On the Virginia Tech side, you got dual threat quarterback Kyron Drones, who he's scoring most of his fantasy points rushing. You're going to really hope that he has a big rushing day if you play him. Here's the problem. This is going to be the best defense he's played. $8,100 is quite expensive. I think there's better points per dollar plays out there, even though I do love the rushing upside of Drones. Because he is a guy who can break a slate with a big-time rushing performance, he's probably going to make my player pool, but probably not be a big part of it. At the running back position for Virginia Tech, they have a workhorse running back in Basil Tootin. 22 carries against Marshall, 21 carries against Old Dominion, over 23 fantasy points in all 3 games. He's going to be getting the football a lot. Again, the problem is I perceive this Rutgers defense to be the best defense that he's played. I like him, but I'm probably not going to be getting him a whole lot this week. The wide receiver spot, so there was much debate coming into the season whether ODU transfer Allie Jennings would be the wide receiver one, whether the guy who ended last season big time, Daquan Felton, would be the wide receiver one for this Virginia Tech team. But it's been Jalen Lane. He's been by far the best receiver in this offense. 9 targets against Old Dominion, turned it into 7 catches for over 100 yards and a touchdown, 26.6 fantasy points. If you're going to stack Drones with anybody, it'd probably have to be Lane. But like I said, Felton and Jennings certainly have upside because they were supposed to have that role. So I wouldn't just totally count them out, but I'm probably not going to play any receivers from this game as one-off plays without playing Kyron Drones. Next up, we have USC heading to Ann Arbor to take on Michigan, which just feels wrong. It feels like when USC and Michigan play, it feels like it should be in the Rose Bowl, not a Saturday in September in Ann Arbor, but I digress. USC is 5.5-point favorites in this game with a total of 45.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 25-20 in favor of USC. For USC, Miller Moss feels a little pricey to me. You would need multiple touchdowns. He gives you 0 rushing upside. I just think there's better quarterback plays out there. And, say what you want about Michigan start the season, they're still playing pretty good pass defense. At the running back spot for USC, they do have Woody Marks, who has been their best runner. He's been great so far this season. This is a tough matchup. As priced up as he is at $7,500, I just think there's better plays in his price range. I'd rather play both of the running backs from the previous game. I would rather play Phil Maffa straight up, even if they were priced the exact same than Woody Marks. So it's probably just a pass for me here on this slate. At the wide receiver spot, here's the real problem with USC. They spread the ball out so much among so many wide receivers that it's really hard to imagine any of them having a big-time game in DFS. So, even if you did play Miller Moss and you wanted to stack him, who do you stack him with? I just don't – there's no appeal in that to me. If I'm picking a quarterback who I know needs to be stacked, I want to know who I am stacking him with because that makes life easier for me. It makes it less things that I have to get right in order for my lineup to go big, right? USC is just a guessing game. Is it going to be Branch, Hudson, Lane, Lemon, Robinson, Ford, McCree? I don't know. So I'm probably not playing any of them, if I'm being honest. If one of them were to break the slate, it would probably be Branch just because he's fast and he can break off explosive plays. On the Michigan side, they are turning to Alex Orji at quarterback, which feels like to me, if neither of your quarterbacks can throw, you might as well play the one who can run. Orji will make my player pool this week because he can run. I think there's a chance, not a good chance, but a chance that he breaks off 100 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns and gets you 20-plus fantasy points. Is it likely? Probably not. Is there a chance? Yes. Because he is that level of athlete. USC's defense is not very good. They're playing at home. They got a lot to prove after the shellacking they took by Texas. Hook 'em. I just think there's a chance Orji breaks the slate, so he's going to be in my player pool. The running back spot, it is an exact 50-50 split between Edwards and Mullings, 36 carries to 36 carries. Mullings has been better this season. And look, they're priced up so high, I have no interest in a 50-50 split running back at $7,000 and $8,000. So I'm not going to be getting to them on DraftKings. On FanDuel, their prices have been a lot more attractive, and I do think you can get to them on FanDuel, but not on DraftKings this week. The wide receiver spot, their best weapon in the passing game has been Colson Loveland. He's banged up. Tyler Morris is banged up. If neither of them play, who's Alex Orji going to throw to? Samaj Morgan. I think if both of them are out, Samaj Morgan enters my player pool as a stacking partner with Alex Orji, but I do think you can just play Alex Orji at quarterback and totally avoid this passing game from Michigan from the wide receiver spot if you want to. Last game of the slate is Utah heading to Stillwater to take on Oklahoma State. Utah is currently 1.5-point favorites with a total of 52.5, which means that Utah is projected to win about 27-25. And this is like the old quarterbacks game. Both these quarterbacks are like my age. They're pushing 30. Cam Rising, I remember when he was recruited at Texas. It was like a decade ago. I was still in college. He's back in the starting lineup this week, and I have interest because of the game environment. He's not traditionally a guy I play a lot of on big slates because he's not traditionally a guy who breaks the slate on big slates. But Oklahoma State is a great game environment to target because they play so fast. They score a lot of points. They are going to push this game and make it a high-scoring game. And that puts interest in Rising for me because there's a chance that he could account for a lot of touchdowns. He's just mobile enough to give you some rushing upside. I don't mind the play at 7,900. He's going to make my player pool. The running back spot, Micah Bernard, is certainly going to make my player pool. He's turned into the workhorse back for this team over the last 2 weeks, 19 and 17 attempts, 23 fantasy points in both games. Love him against an Oklahoma State defense that is not exactly great. And then at the wide receiver spot, Brant Kuithe is really the only appealing receiving option to me. He's this team's tight end. We know Utah loves their tight ends. If I'm stacking up Rising, Kuithe's probably the guy. Singer and Parks are the other 2 starting receivers. They're worth a look, but I think Kuithe's the guy you want. And then for Oklahoma State, Alan Bowman. I think he's worth a look. You could make an argument that he's underpriced. Now, everybody be like, oh, well, this offense is around Ollie Gordon. Alan Bowman's not that good. Well, he gets a ton of volume. The offense gets a ton of plays off. The offense scores a ton of points. He's got a lot of touchdown upside. And $8,300, I think he's worth a look. He's probably going to make my player pool because, again, I think this game environment is so juicy. I'm a big Ollie Gordon fan. I've been on the record for it, but he's been dreadful the last 2 weeks, combining for 22 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks. That ain't going to cut it at a salary $9,700. And this Utah defense is good, and they're nasty, right? I don't think this is a good spot for Ollie Gordon. I don't. I really don't. But we've talked about this before. In DFS, sometimes a bad play becomes a good play when nobody's playing them and they just so happen to go off. Nobody's going to play Ollie Gordon this week. If you want to have the guts to try to play him against this Utah defense, there's a huge leverage opportunity that you're probably not going to have with Ollie Gordon for the entire rest of the season. Now, again, what makes this Oklahoma State offense so attractive to target is they're really condensed on the wide receivers. Presley is their number one. He's their target monster. Stribling plays a ton. He's their deep downfield guy. Owens is more of a possession guy. To this point in the season, that's how it is shaken out. And then, oh, by the way, they also have this guy, Shetron, who came out of nowhere and caught a bomb against Tulsa and was a part of that offense as well. $3,800. I think he's worth a click in GPPs as a flyer. But Presley, Stribling, and Owens, you know who the targets are going to go to. Personally, I much prefer Presley to Stribling and much prefer Stribling to Owens, but the pricing bears that out. So Oklahoma State and Utah, definitely a game that I'm going to be getting some exposure to. All right, but that's going to do it for this episode, y'all. We went a little longer, but thank you, DraftKings. Like, it's your fault. You made it the slate bigger by a game. So, of course, we're going to go a little longer. Anyway, let's recap it real quick. If you need anything from me, reach out to me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. More than happy to answer any questions. Join the Fantasy Corner Discord if you want to talk to some other people about some college football DFS. Articles on the Patreon every single college football slate, profiling my core plays and why. Article on drroto.com for the Saturday main slate, profiling the top plays of the slate regardless of position. And then also, if you're looking to try something new this season, head on over to signupexpert.com/Mike'sPicks. We're partnered with SignUpExpert, and they give you the best offers and promo codes for new users on DFS, props, or sportsbook sites, and they'll even sync to your location. All right. If this video helped you out, hopefully it did. If it helped you out, please hit the like button. Please subscribe. That way you can be with us for the rest of the college football season. But other than that, y'all, that's the 12 or the 13 game main slate. Videos for the Friday slate and the Saturday night slate will be coming out. But hopefully we gave you guys enough information about these 13 games that you can find the right plays and you can build some winning lineups on Saturday. Best of luck to you guys this Saturday. Hopefully we're able to give you guys plenty of good information to help win this Saturday. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you.